start. So hello, it was very nice. I heard my colleague talking about Marina, which actually my lecture starts with the pictures of the Marina as well, but it's a slightly different Marina in England, which of course was built in a long time ago. And let me just start again, because I only have 30 minutes and I've got lots of pictures to show you. So what I'm going to start with, can you actually hear me? So can you hear me now? Or
yes,
can
we hear you and we see slides, this, okay, PowerPoint or whatever.
I usually start all my lectures with those 5 little words, which incidentally, in English, all of them start with the letter I. And it is inspiration. From inspiration, we just turn inspiration into imagination in a design process. From imagination, we have to find a way how to interpret what is going on in our mind. And then with a little bit of an instinct, which we earn through experience, we go to implementation of our projects. So I think, and that is the way how I would like to start. And now, as I said before, so I can show you the pictures of Brighton Marina. Brighton is a seaside resort at the south end of England. And I was working on this project between 1969 and 1980. When I was a student, so everybody told me that for a woman to study architecture is completely impossible because women will never understand the structure. Women are completely useless on site. They don't get on with the contractors. And I think that looking back at my long life, so the opposite was true. So, but my first project when I came to England in 1968, which was meant to be just a short experience, so eventually it became just what I said, the opposite, because the structure became something which led me from the beginning to the end, and we are still working with the structure. So the first project, you probably know, lots of glass staircases, because lots of glass staircases, which we have done the period of, let's say, 1980. And up to more or less now. So all that was well published. Well, let me just explain what happened with glass staircases, because it wasn't a question that aesthetically I would like to make something out of glass. It was a frustration, because after this big project in Brighton, which started off as a virgin site on the south coast of England, that was the first model proposal in 1969. And then eventually I spent 10 years more or less on building site, pouring concrete into the sea, designing breakwaters. And I was working with the best engineers and the best experts of the period of time who existed in England on a project of this kind. And initially we were trying to find even the aesthetic expression of the architecture which we are trying to build. But the project came to the end in 1980 because there was not enough money to continue. There was a recession in 1980. The project was abandoned, and here I was, and I had to find a job to feed myself because the firm moved from out of London. I did not want to move. And so I started doing small shows because I started working from my drawing board in my little flat. And at that point, I got extremely frustrated because all those little jobs, there was no need to use structure. So in the first jobs, I started thinking about hanging the glass shelves. And at that point, I fell in love with glass because the glass is such a beautiful material. It ages very gracefully. It is see-through. It doesn't block the interiors. And now there is another example of working with wood. And that was the first glass staircase. Why didn't glass staircase happen? Because there was no light coming to the basement. So that was the intention, to bring the light. So glass and light love each other. There are two things, or two friends who fell in love before they even were invented. And I think that I love them both as well. So, but as you can see, the scale is still quite clumsy because we used the glass as a structural material, but of course we couldn't use it that time in the structural capacity because glass that time, and we are now talking about 1980, glass was not safe. So if you can see on this little picture, there is a layer of perspex or plexiglass, as you might call it, which I think had held the glass in case the glass broke. And so therefore to prevent the accident, so was done by layering 2 layers, one glass, the structural material, and 1 layer of perspex, which was just of supporting people not to fall through if anything drastic happens. And now I tell you very quickly, through all those different examples of staircases, which we have done over a period of 40 years, starting with the little models, interpreting different structural principles. Sometimes the balustrading is the beam which holds the glass. Sometimes the structure actually happens underneath the staircase. So there are various examples of what was going on. And all that was really working with the best structure engineer who had experience with working with glass, trying to get the planning approvals, moving the building inspector to understand that we were actually understanding our responsibilities. We were not putting people into any danger. And of course, sometimes it was not even just a glass staircase, but it was extensions. That is a house which was built for himself by Overup, the engineer whose name you probably have seen before, and you might even know the firm who still exists. And here we are trying to do everything was Overup himself always was preaching to minimize the use of structural material on any structure by good engineering principles. All these jobs, so went on over this period of time, trying to do the first glass extension, which was an external space when we have the roof, the walls, everything made in glass. Again, glass table. So, and the glass technology is moving ahead. So when I take you towards the end now, so suddenly comes in 1990, the Velvet Revolution in Prague. And now after all those 22 years, which I spent in England and couldn't go back to Prague, so suddenly I've got the opportunity to work in Prague, not only me, but the office, and to design a conservatory to replace the building, which was built in 1946, and which replaced the Renaissance orangery when they kept the orange trees during the reign of Charles I, who was a very famous Czech king. And in this case, again, it was the use of glass. Again, now we are actually coming to laminated glass. So the safety of the glass does not need any perspex. It was, again, a system of components because the condition was to design something which could be moved because historic building department could not decide when they wanted to have a modern structure in vicinity of Prague's castle. And it comes to Czech Republic in 1992 when there was no skill after the long period of communism. All the skill which used to exist during, my father was an architect, so during his lifetime, they were brilliant Czech architects, brilliant craftsmen, brilliant people in all the mainly light, even building industries. But in 1992, there was nobody who could actually do this structure. So we brought a firm from Germany called Zadar, and they started building this system in a workshop which they bought. Of course, the structure moved from left to right. And here is the testing process. Of course, working with material which you are constantly exploring and trying to establish its qualities and moving the limits. So we are testing it and it didn't work. Well, very funny thing happened. We bought the screws in England, and the drill which the German company used was made in Germany. England went metric in 1968 when I came to England, but still in 1992, and the metric, German metric and British metric were not identical. So the holes had to be remade by an English grill in order to be able to fit the screws holding the structure together before it started working properly as it was defined and calculated by the engineers. There is another example. This was a church which was falling apart, and which had this absolutely beautiful loft. And Václav Havel, who was looking for a space when he could actually have his humanitarian conferences after the end of his reign, wanted to reconstruct this church, which was full of scaffolding. That is the space of reconstruction. Before actually you see these people working on site, everything was divided into 4 extremely heavy layers. But I thought it would be the easiest thing to get a planning approval from the historic point of view, just to leave it as a ruin and just do the conservation rather than reconstruction. No, it wasn't the case, because they wanted a complete reconstruction. But the space was built 1320. So what do you reconstruct it to? 1320, 1455, 1780. So eventually we just managed to get a planning approval after 4 or 5 appeals. And now you could see the picture of Havel opening it eventually. These are another project. Again, the glass structure. When the glass is actually holding, the glass crystal of this bus station in London is holding the wings of the cover, which covers the London buses, and again, some of the detailing. But again, it's the glass being used in the structural capacity. And comes back to 1998, and we have been asked to design a little hotel in Prague. And of course, again, there was a problem with the planners, so we eventually managed to get a planning approval for this building, which we are looking at as an extension of this police station, which is a 19th century heavily decorated building. So of course, we had to use the detailing, which was a little bit more articulate in order to persuade the planners that those 2 buildings could actually happily live next to each other. And again, the use of glass in the interiors of this building has been as extensive as possible in that period of time. Again, we are talking between the end of the last century. And now we actually found in Czech Republic people who could do exactly the same quality of the metalwork and the same quality of glass on the staircase, which leads down to the basement. That is, I jump back to London, another project in London, another type of staircase, another structural supporting system, conservatory, and a few of the speculative conversions of the new development in Docklands in London, again with yet another system of glass staircases. And here we actually even try to use the glass bath, to just to experiment how far the material could go. Apparently, it was very pleasant to have a bath. I never tried it, but because it was sold before we finished it. And now, so we even had fun because this bed automatically turns, so you can watch the sunset and you can watch the sunrise from the same circular bed. We did a lot of work in Victoria and Albert Museum when we did a master plan, and again introduced glass to the entrance, reception, shop, which we turned into a gallery. And eventually, we finished up, we did all those glass cabinets. Now we are talking about in 2000, 2001, so 25 years ago. And we eventually finished with a jewelry gallery. When I have to say, when we sketched those display cabinets, I did not believe that we could actually do that without any metal support. It is glass supporting itself. And it was made by a German manufacturer, and honestly, the precision of the workmanship, the ability of inventing the hinges and invented all the metal components which held the glass together, it was absolutely astonishing what we could do together. And there is another glass staircase again. I haven't got time to talk about the principles again. This is a really daring principle of holding each glass by one bead. There is a house in Prague. Again, the process of designing it with all the tests and visualization before we actually started on site. Picture from the construction site. The same firm, Zelle, who built the orangery, so built this little mast supporting the bridge leading from the house into the garden. And again, inside the house, we just had yet another example of yet another staircase, yet another structural principle. And it is still is going from the basement. And then we started actually lighting the glass. So all those little components in the middle of the thread are actually, glass cones which light the glass at night. So the staircase glows. So that is the detail of it. I was born in a town called Zlin, which you may or may not heard of. It was the Bata's town, Bata, the shoemaker, who started the most extensive production of shoes and who became the richest man in the country. But before he did so, he actually tried to design a system of bringing people from the little villages into the town. And he started building those little brick cubes in order to teach what he said cobblers how to use in town, how to live in town, because they had no bathroom. They just had no gardens. They did not know what the living in town was like. So he just built for what he thought 10 years as an experiment, this temporary accommodation, which is still existing. It's still, when you come to Zlin, of course, Bata got involved in production of aeroplanes, telecommunication. And when he died, I think at one of the most important glass building that's the beginning of, it was built in 1932, is the building when his aeroplane in which he killed himself was displayed. So it was a memorial to Bata. This is, for 1932, it is probably the best building which was built in Central Europe. Of course, you can see that he invited Corbusier to come to advise him how to make a proposal for the future town. Of course, the Second World War finished it all. And here we are now in about 25 years ago. And these buildings, which you can see in front of you, used to be schools, and they were completely disintegrated over the period of time. So we have been asked to replace some schools by university library and the building of the administration for the university. And that is the complex of the buildings which we have now done for the last 25 years. So that is the Philharmonic Orchestra. Again, I'm not even talking about glass, but we use glass in every single capacity when it's a glass brick, of course, working on building site. And when I mentioned inspiration at the very beginning, this inspiration comes with this little creature, which has got exactly the same type of structure as the building, this oval shape of the building, so allowed us to do. The building is viewed from the top. And of course, the nature manages to find a way of surviving anywhere. So this little bird just made a nest on the top of the crane, which was moving through the winter months. And at the beginning of the spring, all the little birdies flew out, having been moved constantly with the contractor. So I saw that was a very touching detail, which I'm going to share with you. That is the inside of the building, again, using glass bricks, glazed atrium. Looking down now, stable the building from the outside, and few different ways of using the external cladding, which is the third skin of the building for the acoustic purposes, and also because we had so little money that we couldn't actually afford to use very expensive facade. And this is, of course, the acoustic tests, working with concrete cladding, experimenting with every single possible way of making sure that the acoustic of this oval shape, which is the best possible shape for a Philharmonic Orchestra building, but we were so restricted by the road and by our building lines that we couldn't really do anything else but the oval shape. This is really a joke because, the graphic designer made now distinguish between male and female on the doors of the toilets, and men didn't like it because they just did not be called fools, as and few months after we completed building, somebody sent us this photograph of a little silo in a little village and asked us whether we were inspired this building. Well, somebody who must have been a genius designed this building, because it's so terribly difficult to find a roof of a round or an oval shape. That is another building, which is a faculty of human science, again with the atrium, the light penetrating through the building and feeding the lecture rooms from both sides. And here we couldn't work with glass, but that is a metal cladding over the lecture theatre. Another project in Prague which has not been built, but again playing with a glass crystal, a project also unbuilt in London, just of opposite the place where the Battle of Trafalgar was held. A bridge designed for Bratislava, Ostrava, a mining city which also hasn't been built. And I'm going to finish with two staircases. One is glass, and that is the last staircase, more or less, when we finished the research with the glass, because this staircase has got no glass components. Each thread is held by a vertical glass fin, which we are testing in a workshop. And this is the loading, this big object sitting on the top of the glass represents the load of 10 people. Well, we only needed to support 3, but anyway, so it was nice to know how strong the material is. And you can see that the support for each thread is this simple vertical laminated fin. Here we are with our structure, is testing it in a workshop, and it was transported to America, partially when in Belgium. And then we also, that is from the building site in New York, and the staircase is fully lit. And as I'm saying, apart from the handrail, there is no metal anymore. It's an exhibition of Tiffany lamps, which is very dear to America. And that is the last staircase, which I'm going to show you before I have got 10 more minutes left for the rest of it. And that is a staircase in a very famous building, which was built during the time, or started being built during the time of Henry VIII. And in one of the corners of this building, there is a very famous architect's chambers staircase, which is considered one of the best in the history of London architecture. And we have been asked to do a staircase in the other corner. So the inspiration comes from these trees, which are kind of the life of the trees is sucked out by those creepers which run across the tree and produce a separate structure. So then the tree in the middle dies, and the structure itself starts being a structure where the little creepers and little greenery grows up and replaces the trees in the forest. So that was the inspiration. The staircase goes up 6 floors. And it is only supported every second twist, so it is structurally extremely demanding. And it's made of a new generation of concrete material, which I think it is 10 times stronger. In this case, it could be even more stronger than that, but this material is 10 times stronger than concrete. We have got this supporting stabilizing structure in the middle, which takes some of the vertical loading, but also stops the staircase from turning, because, of course, since it turns twice before it gets the next support and then the landing from which people access the floors. So, of course, there is a lot of movement, especially when people are running down on it. So that structure in the middle does exactly what is needed. And when you look down, so this is exactly what it looks like. That shows the principle. And that is when it's being made. It's being made in Italy. And the owner of the factory, who had this brave, who made the brave decision doing a staircase, which had never been done before, is this lovely woman, Cinzia. That is when one of the components of the landing is taken out of the form and transported to site. And now I'm going to finish with the few projects which we are doing in the office now. This is one of the horrid buildings built in 1968, between 1968 and 1973, in mining town Strava, which used to be the Black City. Now this town has gone through the process of regeneration and revitalization, and they would like to keep this building because they know that the planners would never allow them to rebuild anything of this height, that is 22 floors, completely abandoned and unused, because the inside and the building was so badly built that it was a haunted house, as people called it. So that is our proposal, how to make this building green. We have, luckily the structure is so over-designed that we could put all those balconies, redesign the inside of the flat, putting the extra fire escape staircase, deal with the external facade that everybody has got a view. And we have managed to persuade the client that the building needs to be a green building. So the city of Ostrava decided that they were going to maintain the greenery themselves to make sure that people would not just let the plants die. There is another project which is a little conversion on the top of this building. So there was a fire, so therefore there are no bits of the historic structure left. So we are now talking back, and so we redesigned the top space to produce a music hall. And we have done two alternatives. One of them is the acoustic ceiling, of course, because the space is very low. So we managed to get inside the loft between the trusses, and that is made of plaster, cast plaster, which has got the acoustic shapes. And the other alternative was making a wooden ceiling, again, shaping those wooden panels in a way that it would produce the acoustic ceiling to reflect the sound in various places. The client selected the white version, which is made of plaster. And these are process of being designed. One green building, which again I think that is gives people as much of the external space, green balconies, green roof, which I think that we call the green. Place is green city. And another project when we are replacing this again, I think that it was actually 1960 or 70, I don't know exactly which year, at telecommunication center, which is full of asbestos, had to be demolished. And to replace the entire area, I think that we won a competition to build tall buildings. We actually had 3 tall buildings, which the conditions of the competition allowed us to do. And going height actually meant the fact that all the developers are always trying to overdevelop the site because they pay so much money for every single square inch of the property. So they try to put so much development on it, and there are no public spaces, no gardens. So we try to go high, and by going high, so we made a denser density at certain part of the scheme so high that it allowed us for a large public space. Unfortunately, this is when it was at the beginning. We are trying to prove how high it is in comparison with an existing very famous church with the staircase in Prague. And that was the initial scheme on basis of which we won this competition. But the historic building department decided that they would only allow us to have one tower, which is really a bit of a joke. But now, of course, we have to reduce grossly the public space, which would have been very nice to have. But now we are at least experimenting with one building and working on a new proposal that is, again, the green living, trying to give as much greenery inside, outside to people. We worked with overlaps on this proposal, so it actually shows how we studied the structure, the loading, how we were thinking about minimizing, again, the use of material and maximizing the right kind of proportion of cantilever as opposed to the encased concrete floor, how we were thinking about adding the balconies, whether it was a steel structure or prefabricated element or in situ element, and the wind conditions, because there is always a problem with the wind conditions around the hard buildings. So we went through the process of what it would look like. It is an industrial part of the city, as you can see. And then I think that you can see in the background those buildings sticking out, but we are still working on the project. Maybe it will be built, but you will only see one tower, not three. And here we are having a little joke. So when we put these kind of cylindrical buildings, which are like extrusions, in different colors, because architects are so terrified of using colors. Everything is gray and gray and gray and sometimes black. And so we just made those buildings a little bit colorful and set them up in different cities, which you may recognize to the words. A famous architect, Dennis in London, built one of the most important buildings, which is the opera. And what happens, so he gets the thanks by one of the artists writing his statement on the wall, which says boring. Well, the building definitely is not boring, but that is what architects is always faced with at the end of the creative process, that it may not be accepted and it may be heavily criticized during his lifetime, sometimes even after. And that is just a little message, which I'm not going to translate because it's a little bit rude, but who you speak English, so you can really understand the joke of it. During my lifetime, I happened to be in Berlin when the Berlin was built in 1965. And I managed to be in Berlin again when the wall came down. I managed to see this wall between Israel and Palestine. And Donald Trump was going to build a wall in Mexico. So those walls are kind of symbol of the overpowering characteristic of certain despotic regimes. But I think that what you can see, that the same artist who wrote boring on the wall of the London Opera, so he actually made a hole in this wall, and there is a little boy walking or playing on a sandpit. And this is a picture which I found a long, long time ago in Perimeter. These are the different molecules of aluminium, the one on the right side, ferrum or iron on the left. This is not architecture. That is a molecule of gold, an electromagnetic field of something which I have forgotten. But all those elements, going back to the word instinct at the very beginning of the lectures, they actually circulate through our blood. So our way of thinking is definitely, connected with the way how we are built and how the nature is built. when you look at the bud of the poppy, and when you see how much energy and effort is needed for the poppy to open up those fine, tiny petals of the flower, and in order to get, and before it has to get rid of this very aggressive skin, that is really our life. We have got, there are millions of proposals how we are going to live in future, when we are going to live in walking cities, up in the sky, underneath, or inside the sea. We are constantly, kind of surrounded by network of our webs and our systems. But when it comes to the reality, I think that I always finish with these slides. That is how we do it. You start at the point when you have the start. You go up and down through dead end, mess up, you go back, you get lost, you go you get even more lost, you go left and right, make a detour, you go up through who knows, maybes, going around in circles. And then when you introduce a little bit of talent, modesty, discipline, effort, experience, understanding, courage, and a huge amount of luck, with an absolutely enormous amount of work and sweat pouring down to making a little sea with the fish. So now I can't see on my computer the end, but hopefully you can see it. You either miss the target completely, sometimes you have got a near miss, and if you are very, very lucky, sometimes you actually can hit it. So thank you very much. And I think that I've just done my 30 minutes. And now I don't know when there are any questions, but thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting. We wish you all the best. Thank you very much. We really enjoyed.